Good morning, Year 6, and welcome to English. This week's English lessons are based around World Book Week, and the text we are studying in Year 6 is James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. Our learning objective today is to find and use evidence from the text. I'm going to read to you the first 4 chapters of James and the Giant Peach. You can either listen along, you can follow the text on the screen, or you are more than welcome to make notes on a whiteboard about any key information you think you may need. I'm going to introduce you to 3 characters in James and the Giant Peach. You've got James, Aunt Sponge, and Aunt Spiker. And your task at the end of this video is to choose one of the 3 characters that you are going to develop. So here we go. Chapter 1. Until he was 4 years old, James Henry Trotter had a happy life. He lived peacefully with his mother and father in a beautiful house beside the sea. There were always plenty of other children for him to play with, and there was the sandy beach for him to run about on, and the ocean to paddle in. It was the perfect life for a small boy. Then one day James's mother and father went to London to do some shopping, and there was a terrible thing that happened. Both of them suddenly got eaten up, in full daylight mind you, and on a crowded street, by an enormous angry rhinoceros which had escaped from London Zoo. Now this, as you can well imagine, was a rather nasty experience for 2 such gentle parents. But in the long run, it was far nastier for James than it was for them. Their troubles were all over in a jiffy. They were dead and gone in 35 seconds. Poor James, on the other hand, was still very much alive. And all at once he found himself alone and frightened in the vast unfriendly world. The lovely house by the seaside had to be sold immediately, and the little boy, carrying nothing but a small suitcase containing a pair of pyjamas and a toothbrush, was sent away to live with his 2 aunts. Their names were Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, and I'm sorry to say that they were both really horrible people. They were selfish and lazy and cruel, and right from the beginning they started beating poor James for almost no reason at all. They never called him by his real name, but always referred to him as "you disgusting little beast," or "you filthy nuisance," or "you miserable creature." And they certainly never gave him any toys to play with or any picture books to look at. His room was as bare as a prison cell. They lived, Aunt Sponge, Aunt Spiker, and now James as well, in a queer ramshackle house on the top of a high hill in the south of England. The hill was so high that from almost anywhere in the garden James could look down and see for miles and miles across the marvellous landscape of woods and fields. And on a very clear day, if he looked in the right direction, he could see a tiny grey dot far away on the horizon, which was the house that he used to live in with his beloved mother and father. And just beyond that he could see the ocean itself, a long thin streak of blackish blue, like a line of ink beneath the rim of the sky. But James was never allowed to go down off the top of the hill. Neither Aunt Sponge nor Aunt Spiker could ever be bothered to take him out herself, not even for a small walk or a picnic. And he certainly wasn't permitted to go alone. "The nasty little beast will only get into mischief if he goes out into the garden," Aunt Spiker had said. And terrible punishments were promised him, such as being locked up in a cellar with the rats for a week, if he even so much as dared to climb over the fence. The garden, which covered the whole of the top of the hill, was large and desolate, and the only tree in the entire place, apart from a clump of dirty old laurel bushes at the far end, was an ancient peach tree that never gave any peaches. There was no swing, no seesaw, no sand pit, and no other children were ever invited to come up the hill to play with poor James. There wasn't so much as a dog or a cat around to keep him company. And as time went on, he became sadder and sadder, and more lonely. And he used to spend hours every day standing at the bottom of the garden, gazing wistfully at the lovely but forbidden world of woods and fields and ocean that was spread out below him like a magic carpet. Chapter 2. After James Henry Trotter had been living with his aunts for 3 whole years, there came a morning when something rather peculiar happened to him. And this thing, which I say was only rather peculiar, soon caused a second thing to happen which was very peculiar. And then the very peculiar thing in its own turn caused a fantastically peculiar thing to occur. It all started on a blazing hot day in the middle of summer. Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker and James were all out in the garden. James had been put to work as usual. This time he was chopping wood for the kitchen stove. Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker were sitting comfortably in deck chairs nearby, sipping tall glasses of fizzy lemonade and watching him to see that he didn't stop work for one moment. Aunt Sponge was enormously fat and very short. She had small eyes, a sunken mouth, and one of those white flabby faces that looked exactly as though it had been boiled. She was like a great white soggy overboiled cabbage. Aunt Spiker, on the other hand, was lean and tall and bony, and she wore steel-rimmed spectacles that fixed onto the end of her nose with a clip. She had a screeching voice and long, wet, narrow lips, and whenever she got angry or excited, little flecks of spit would come shooting out of her mouth as she talked. And there they sat, these two ghastly hags, sipping their drinks and every now and again screaming at James to chop faster and faster. They also talked about themselves, each one saying how beautiful she thought she was. Aunt Sponge had a long-handled mirror on her lap, and she kept picking it up and gazing at her own hideous face.
I look and smell, Aunt Sponge declared, as lovely as a rose. Just feast your eyes upon my face, observe my shapely nose. Behold my heavenly silky locks, and if they take off both my socks, you'll see my dainty toes. But don't forget, Aunt Spiker cried, how much your tummy shows. Aunt Sponge went red, and Aunt Spiker said, my sweet, you cannot win. Behold my gorgeous curvy shape, my teeth, my charming grin. Oh, beauteous me, how I adore my radiant looks, please ignore the pimple on my chin, my dear old trout. Aunt Sponge cried out, you're only bones and skin. Such as loveliness as I oppose can only true shine in Hollywood. Aunt Sponge declared, oh, wouldn't that be fine? I'd capture all the nation's heart. You give me all the leading part. The stars would all resign. I think you made Aunt Spiker a lovely Frankenstein.
Poor James was still slaving away at the chopping block. The heat was terrible. He was sweating all over. His arm was aching. The chopper was a large, blunt thing, far too heavy for a small boy to use. And as he worked, James began to thinking about all the other children in the world and what they might be doing at this moment. Some would be riding tricycles in their gardens. Some would be walking in cool woods and picking bunches of wild flowers. And all the little friends whom he used to know would be down by the seaside, playing in the wet sand and splashing around in the water. Great tears began oozing out of James's eyes and rolling down his cheeks. He stopped working and leaned against the chopping block, overwhelmed by his unhappiness. What's the matter with you? Aunt Spiker screeched, glaring over the top of her steel spectacles. James began to cry. Stop that immediately and get on with your work, you nasty little beast, Aunt Sponge ordered. Oh, Aunt Sponge, James cried out. And Aunt Spiker! Couldn't we all, please, just for once, go down to the seaside on the bus? It isn't very far, and I feel so hot and awful and lonely. Why, you lazy good-for-nothing brutes! Aunt Spiker shouted at him. Beat him! Cried Aunt Sponge. I certainly will, Aunt Spiker snapped. She glared at James, and James looked back at her with large, frightened eyes. I shall beat you later on in the day when I don't feel so hot, she said. And now get out of my sight, you disgusting little worm, and give me some peace. James turned and ran. He ran as fast as he could to the far end of the garden and hid himself behind a clump of dirty old laurel bushes that were mentioned earlier. Then he covered his face with his hands and began to cry and cry. It was at this point that the first thing of all, the rather peculiar thing that had led to so many other much more peculiar things, happened to him. For suddenly, just behind him, James heard a rustling of leaves, and he turned round and saw an old man in a funny dark green suit emerging from the bushes. He was a very small old man, but he had a huge bald head and a face that was covered all over with bristly black whiskers. He stopped when he was about 3 yards away, and he stood there, leaning on his stick and staring hard at James. When he spoke, his voice was very slow and creaky. "Come closer to me, little boy," he said, beckoning James over with a finger. "Come right up closer to me, and I will show you something wonderful." James was too frightened to move. The old man hobbled a step or two nearer, and then he put a hand into the pocket of his jacket and took out a small white paper bag. "You see this?" he whispered, waving the bag gently to and fro in front of James's face. "You know what that is, my dear? You know what's inside this little bag?" Then he came nearer still, leaning forward and pushing his face so close that James could feel his breath blowing on his cheeks. The breath smelled musty and stale and slightly mildewed, like air in an old cellar. "Take a look, my dear," he said, opening the bag and tilting it towards James. Inside it, James could see a mass of tiny green things that looked like stones or crystals, each one about the size of a grain of rice. They were extraordinarily beautiful, and there was a strange brightness about them, a sort of luminous quality that made them glow and sparkle in the most wonderful way. "Listen to them," the old man whispered. "Listen to them move." James stared into the bag, and sure enough, there was a faint rustling sound coming up from inside it, and then he noticed that all the thousands of little green things were slowly, very, very slowly, stirring about and moving over each other as though they were alive. "There's more power and magic in those things in there than in all the rest of the world put together," the old man said softly. But, what are they?" James murmured, finding his voice at last. "Where do they come from?" "Aha!" the old man whispered. "You'd never guess that." He was crouching a little now and pushing his face still closer and closer to James, until the tip of his nose was actually touching the skin on James's forehead. Then suddenly he jumped back and began waving his stick madly in the air. "Crocodile tongues!" he cried. 1,000 long, slimy crocodile tongues boiled up in the skull of a dead witch for 20 days and nights with the eyeballs of a lizard. Add the fingers of a young monkey, the gizzard, the beak of a green parrot, the juice of a porcupine, and 3 spoonfuls of sugar. Stew for another week, and then let the moon do the rest. All at once he pushed the white paper bag into James's hands and said, "Here, you take it. It's yours." Chapter 4. James Henry Trotter stood there clutching the bag and staring at the old man. And now the old man said, "All you've got to do is this. Take a large jug of water and pour all the little green things into it. Then very slowly, one by one, add 10 hairs from your own head. That sets them off. It gets them going. In a couple of minutes the water will soon begin to froth and bubble furiously. And as soon as that happens, you must quickly drink it all down. The whole jugful in one gulp. And then, my dear, you will feel it churning and boiling in your stomach, and steam will start coming out of your mouth. And immediately after that, marvelous things will happen. Fabulous, unbelievable things. And you will never be miserable again in your life, because you are miserable, aren't you? You needn't tell me. I know all about it. Now off you go and do exactly as I say, and don't whisper a word of this to those 2 horrible aunts of yours. Not a word. And don't let those green things in there get away from you either, because if they do escape, then they will be working their magic upon somebody else instead, upon you. And that isn't what you want at all, is it, my dear? Whoever they meet first, be it a bug, insect, animal, or tree,